Welcome to this latest edition of the Real Deal podcast, our Chicago Bulls Classic Series. As we look back at the Chicago Bulls championship games, classic games over the last couple of weeks, coinciding, of course, with the Jordan documentary. This is the conclusion of that series as we will be looking back at game 6 of the 1998 NBA Finals. Utah, Chicago. Chicago, of course, came into that game up 3-2. Everybody knows what happens in that game. But it's important to look, as we look back on this game to understand what was going on leading up into this game. You had number one, you knew that Chicago it was a wrap for Chicago as far as uh, the dynasty, as far as that triumvirate with Jordan, Pippen, and Jackson. That was over with. You knew that going into that game, going in, throughout the course of the season. Of course, the season was called The Last Dance. It's called The Last Dance. That was given title, of course, given by Phil Jackson. Um, Utah, so you knew that coming in. Utah was coming off a great Game 5 win where Karl Malone basically single-handedly carried them in Chicago. It was like 90-86 or 90-88 in game 5 in Chicago. He had 39 points in that game, probably his best finals game of his career, to be honest with you. I mean, he was that good in that game. They might have had one other player in double figures, to be honest with you, in that game. So he's coming in. You have Kukoc coming off a 30-point game in game 5. Jordan, now, keep this in mind. They were in the midst, because of the form, they were in the midst of the third game in basically 5 days. So games 4 through 6 took place in a 5-day, in a 5-day window. So the Bulls are at the end of their rope physically. If they are physically shot at this point, Jordan's playing heavy minutes. Um, in those last 4 games, now, game 3 was the embarrassment game, the game that you just won't be able to explain. For forever. That was the 96-54 game. Otherwise, this series was a close series. I mean, this series was decided by at least 5 points or less in every other game, with the exception of game 3, which, again, you will never in 100 years be able to explain that game, considering how closely contested this series was over the better part of 2 years. This was a 2-year culmination with these two teams meeting 12 times in the finals. 9 of those 12 games went down to the wire. So game 3 in this series was an aberration. Still the most one-sided finals game in NBA history. That 42 shellacking that Chicago put on them. But games 4 through 6 were all close games. And Chicago came into this game running on absolute fumes. Jordan was playing heavy minutes. We see what happened with Pippen. Pippen's back was shot by the time this game came about. We had got about 1 million NBC reports on Pippen's back. It is remarkable. You would thought I would love to. I didn't count how many reports we got on Pippen's back versus how many reports we got on Michael Jordan the previous season with the flu game. I guarantee you it was just as many. It was just as many reports on Pippen's back as it was Michael Jordan's flu during the previous season. But so he was a shell of himself, but still would play an integral role in this game. They get off in this. Of course, you had the NBC broadcast with Costas, Isaiah, and Collins, which you can make a case, and I've done now 3 games where This was the first year that Costas would be taking over for Marv Albert. Remember, Marv Albert went on that 3-year suspension due to the sexual assault case that he had going on. So this was the first year that Costas would take over for him. Costas went 98, 99, 2000. And then Marv Albert came back in 2001. I can make a case that this was their best team. I mean, Isaiah Thomas, we know Doug Collins is one of the best in the business in terms of color commentators. Isaiah Thomas was tremendous in this game. I mean, he really was. And how complimentary he was of Michael Jordan without seemingly coming off as being phony, which it wasn't, uh, has not aged well in terms of your perception of Michael Jordan based on what Michael Jordan's depiction of Isaiah Thomas in this documentary. Because Isaiah was fair to Jordan, he was complimentary of Jordan throughout, even when he was struggling with his shooting. And Isaiah, I mean, again, Isaiah was a great not play by play, but a great commentator, a great in terms of breaking down the game and going inside the player's mind. Remember, we're talking about Finals MVP, all-time great point guard. He was tremendous in this game all around. So I found that, consider how Jordan has just completely shitted on Isaiah during this Jordan documentary. Found that interesting that Isaiah was more than fair to Michael Jordan during the course of these broadcasts. I mean, even we've gone back and done even with the Indiana broadcast in '98, with Eastern Conference Finals Game 7 that we did a couple weeks ago. So Utah gets off to a slow start, down 17-8. They immediately go to the bench and insert Carr and Isley and get right back into the game. Karl Malone, probably his second best finals game of his career, had a big quarter. You can tell throughout this first quarter that Jordan senses that they're shorthanded, that he knows that they're shorthanded, and he was constantly first quarter, and this been a theme throughout the game. The first and third quarters of this game, Jordan is clearly pacing himself. There's no two ways about it. He's clearly pacing. He's clearly saving up his energy. He gets off to a slow start in the first quarter. A relatively slow start in the first quarter. But at the end of the first quarter, it was 25-22. Again, Utah making the change in terms of as soon as they went to Antoine Carr and Howard Isley, it completely changed the trajectory of this game. And again, the pace of this game is all Chicago. And one of the problems Utah had, especially watching these last two games, watching this game and doing the game we did last week in '97, that flu game, is pace. The pace of this game was played at you can't play it any slower. And that favored Chicago. At this point, especially their last three championship teams, Chicago was a grind. Chicago's defense was better than his offense, to be honest with you. I know in '96 they averaged like 105 points, only gave up 92, but their defense was far superior, to their offense. And by '98, with their limited offensive weapons, remember '98 Pippen has the foot injury. We know Rodman was never really an offensive threat to begin with. Kukoc was pretty good. Kukoc had a decent year, had a decent year, and would have a big role in this game. They had limited weapons offensively going into this finals, and their whole deal was to slow down the game, play great defense, and then let Michael win it at the end. That was a strategy for Chicago, and the problem for Utah is. The idea you would try to want to run Chicago and get easy shots, put Chicago in position, get yourself in a position where you're not playing against Chicago's set defense. Utah wasn't built that way. I mean, Stockton, he had a 35, 36-year-old point guard. Howard Isley, was younger, but not that much more athletic, to be honest with you. He wasn't a dynamic. He wasn't a guy that, that was going to push the pace, even as being a younger player. So Utah, the pace of play really favored Chicago and really favored Jordan. He already had to expend a lot of energy, but imagine how much energy he would have had to expend had Utah been able to push the pace. So first quarter, Utah, Malone has a big first quarter. Utah, Antoine Guard, gets a couple buckets. Utah's up by 3. Utah's up by 3. Pippen, after he dunks, he has a dunk, and then his back is just completely shot. I mean, his back is just shot. After that, he came in, he dunks. He only played in the first half, only played like 7 minutes in the first half. Second quarter, the game has probably its best quarter, without question, its best quarter, the best quarter of the game. The game is played at extremely, relatively at a high level. You see Jordan, second quarter, you see Jordan having a big second quarter, 15 points in the second quarter. Malone and Jordan are going at it. Again, are going at it. The pace picks up a bit. The pace picks up. Kukoc starts to get into the game, and halftime you had 49, 46, and in comparison to the first quarter, this game, in comparison to the first quarter, it was a classic quarter. In that second quarter, both teams played well. Both teams shot the ball well. You had again, the pace picked up. There was a play in this game that has not been talked about enough over the course of history. So Howard Isley, Utah's up by 4 in the second quarter. Howard Isley hits a 3 at the end of the shot clock. They count, the bucket does not count. Is clear and evident. Now you could say that that whoever was doing the timekeeping in terms of the 24-second shot clock let that second lasted a little bit longer than it should have. That took longer for whatever reason. That the clock. I mean, I don't know if that's on the clock operator, but it was a long 1 second. But it was evident when they went back and replayed and did a replay that Howard Isley clearly got that shot off, and that should have been a 7-point game. That was a big shot, and that was 3 points that was taken away from Utah in a game that they ended up losing by 1. Again, it's been at least 10 years since I've watched this game. That was a big play in this game. So instead of being up by 3, instead of being up by 6 at halftime, Utah is only up by 3. Jordan has 23 at the half. Malone has 20 at the half. Malone is torching Dennis Rodman, torching whoever they put on him in the post, making jump shots, really playing some of his best basketball that you've seen Karl Malone play in the finals. Rodman really in this game really had no answer for Karl Malone. It wasn't until this late in the second half where they started they started throwing some different coverages at Malone, where they started in which they were able to slow him down. So third quarter is just ugly, to say the least. Third quarter, you have there's a quarter in which the teams only combined for 33 points. You have Malone and Rodman starting to get into it, and again, something that I forgot, that Rodman and Malone end up wrestling, and they mentioned this during the broadcast, end up having a wrestling match for the WCW in the summer of that year. Of course, that had nothing to do with this particular game, but just I found that I forgot all about that Karl Malone had a little stint with wrestling. Again, this third quarter was ugly, to say the least. Jordan clearly in the third quarter was pacing himself. He took like six, I think he only took like 6 shots in the third quarter. Pippen comes back in the third quarter with a bucket, gives them somewhat of a spark just to be on the floor. And Pippen in this game really gutted out this game. He really had a gutsy performance in this game. I know he only had 8 points and played 25 minutes, but it was a big 25 minutes because Chicago was limited offensively. Both teams were limited offensively in this game. In the second half, buckets were hard to come by in the second half, in the third quarter, in general. But at the end of the third quarter, Utah goes on a mini run to go up by 5 at the end of the third quarter. Utah, up until this point, has outscored Chicago in each quarter, though minuscule, not by a lot. As a matter of fact, I think the second quarter was even tied. But up until that point, Chicago has not won a quarter. So we get to the fourth quarter, and again, the pace of this game is, and I mentioned this, the pace of the game is slow. I mean, it is like it is absolute at a plant. The game is being played at a crawl, and the fourth quarter comes out. Jordan is in clear attack mode. Jordan in the fourth quarter scores 16 points, goes to the free throw, went to the free throw line 8 times. He's going to the basket every single time. And for whatever reason, Utah left Byron Russell basically on an island against Michael Jordan. So you had they had limited offensive players. Jordan scored more than half their points in this game. He ended up with 45. Chicago scored 87. So Jordan scored was about 53% of their offense. Now Kukoc hits a big 3 to tie the game at 70. Kukoc had a big game, 15 points in this game. But their offense in the fourth quarter was all Michael Jordan. Right? They had in the fourth quarter, they scored. So I look here. Chicago scored 26 points in the fourth quarter. Jordan scores 16 of those 26 points. Rodman in this half had some big tips, offensive rebounding tips. Now, at this point, Rodman had completely checked out in terms of where Rodman was a shell of what he was when he first got to the Bulls. It wasn't even close to what the Rodman in 96. 97, we doing the game last week. We did a game last week with the flu game in Game 5 of 97. They were already talking about that Rodman probably wouldn't be on the team in 98. So he's coming off the bench at this point. Now they had no Bison Dele, no Jason Gaffey. They're thin on the front line. And again, Malone in this game torched Chicago's front line. Chicago makes an adjustment defensively, and they start collapsing on Karl Malone. They double team him, triple team him, basically force the ball out. Every time he posted up, they forced the ball out of his hand. The only time he was able to get free was a couple times he would screen, fake like he was going down the post up, and then pop out for a jump shot. He did that a couple times, made a couple big jump shots. Made a couple big jump shots in the fourth quarter. Malone was great in this game, though. I had no problem with Malone in this game. He had 31, 11, and 7. Again, the problem with Utah was that they had no one. They had no one outside Malone that really was a major threat. They had no one that really was a major threat, especially down the stretch in the fourth quarter. Look at the box score Malone, Hornacek. Now Hornacek played well in this game. He had 17 points. Uh, Stockton hit some big shots, we know, but Stockton. This was the first time. This was a game where Stockton looked old. Now again, I know Stockton made some big shots, especially the 3-point shot that we're going to talk about. But Stockton, he had some minor back issues. There were plays where he couldn't bend down. He looked old in this game. Hornacek had a nice game with 17 points, but really nobody outside of Malone and Hornacek, that was the offense for Utah in this game. And you kept hearing them throughout the course of this game talk about Antoine Carr. They need Antoine Carr. Antoine Carr, previous game, had 10 points made all 5 of his shots, played well. But if you were dependent on Antoine Carr at this, if you're in a situation where it's game 6, you're down 3 games to 2, and you have to depend on Antoine Carr, you are in a lot of trouble, and that tells me that the team is not properly constructed. Because there's no way that you're beating the Bulls depending on Antoine Carr. So we get to the sequence. It's 83-83. Stockton, they run a perfectly executed play where Stockton goes across the court, gets the screen set. You have Malone to Stockton, cross the court. Stockton hits a 3 and Utah goes up 86-83 with 41.7 seconds left. Here's the key sequence in what has become a legendary sequence for one Michael Jordan. Chicago gets the ball. Jordan goes right away and scores in about 4 seconds to cut the lead to 1, to 86-85. That's big because Utah comes down. They get the ball in Malone. Malone again. All throughout the course of the second half, they have been double teaming and triple teaming Malone. Malone's been stripped at least twice in the fourth quarter by Scottie Pippen. Jordan doubles back. He doesn't follow through on Hornacek because he was trailing Hornacek. He doesn't follow through on Hornacek. He doubles back. Malone never sees him. He strips Malone, comes down, of course, and hits one of the most famous shots, of course, in NBA history, gives a subtle shove to Byron Russell. And it was subtle. It was not I can understand why. There was no way that they were going to call an offensive foul on Michael Jordan in that situation, even on the road, even in Utah, they were known. Utah always got calls down on their home court, especially in playoff games. But there was no way I can't blame an official for not making that call because give Jordan credit. It was a subtle push. It was a subtle push that any official could miss. Gives him enough space, gives him a clear look at the basket, and it was basically game, set, match at that point. Utah actually got a good shot off with Stockton. That shot almost went in, despite the fact that Harper was right in his face. And there you go. The game was over, and just like that, similar to Game 6 of the '93 Finals, where it's like Phoenix is up by 4 with like 40 seconds left, and then next thing you know, Chicago scores 5 points. And it's like, what the hell happened? This wasn't as bad as that, but it was close because when Stockton hits that 3, you just think to yourself that there's no way that Chicago is winning this game. Like you like, we're going to Game 7 when Stockton makes that 3. And you look at this game even more so, and even more so than Game 5, or more so than the series in '97. Chicago was absolutely ripe for the picking in this game. They're absolutely ripe for the picking. Utah lost this game, not so much in the fourth quarter, not so much going down 3 games to 1 in the series. Utah lost this game in the offseason. You look at Utah's roster from '97 and from the previous year, it's basically the same team. They basically had the same team. Um, I think Utah got to a point to where they were comfortable in their style of play. They were comfortable in their roster. They were comfortable with the culture. And yes, they were winning 50 games every year, 53, 55. They went on a stretch where they won. We talked about it, where they had back-to-back years of winning 60 games. They won 64 games the previous year. They won 62 games and tied Chicago for the best record in this season. They had home court because of the tiebreaker. They swept Chicago over the course of the regular season. But if you're going to beat Chicago, you had to think outside the box. You had to do something different. They played Chicago, including the finals. Leading up to the finals, they had played Chicago 10 times, 6 times in the playoffs, 6 times in the 97 finals, 4 times between the two regular seasons. So you knew, if you're Utah, that you had to construct your team or to make trades to beat Chicago. Everything should have been going to that season. What do we have to do? What moves do we have to make to beat Chicago? Because this is the team that we're going to face. Period. I look at the Pistons back in '88. The Pistons are coming off a series in which they probably should have beat the Lakers in '88. The following season, around the trade deadline, they trade their leading scorer, or one of their leading scorers, probably their second best player, Adrian Dantley. Adrian Dantley's a Hall of Famer. They trade a guy who was a big time player for Mark Aguirre. Now, we can go tooth and nail and discuss how big of an impact did Mark Aguirre have on that team, as far as, was he a better player than Adrian Dantley? Probably not. But the bottom line is, they make that trade, they win back-to-back championships, 89 and 90. So the point was, they were not settled in on just running back the same team. And this was a culture problem for Utah. Utah did not have enough offensive weapons to deal with the Bulls. And again, this was a failure of the organization to come in with some new pieces. Again, you had to beat. You're talking about trying to beat the 5-time champions. You had to think outside the box, and they were not able to. From the Chicago side, Jordan goes 45 45 points, 4 steals, 15 to 35, 12 or 15 from the free throw line. If you count the free throws, Jordan took over 40 shots. This probably was the best game, considering what was on the line, that Michael Jordan's ever played. Considering that Pippen back was shot, Ron Harper came in with the flu. Rodman, the only guy you got offense from other than Jordan was the only guy that he got help from, considerable help from, offensively from a scoring standpoint, was Tony Kukoc. Tony Kukoc had 15 points. And again, the game before had 30. So Tony Kukoc ended that series, basically ended that series averaging well over 20 points a game, 22 and a half points a game in the last 2 games of that series, and was probably their second best player in that series. What has not aged well to me in the end game, it was an iconic performance by Jordan, an iconic shot. He carried him. But this whole idea that he didn't have help in this game was just not the case. Dennis Rodman had 7 points. He makes a jump shot, I believe, in the fourth quarter. That was big. I mean, it's a big shot. He made a free throw to tie the game. He's an awful free throw shooter. He, you have Tony Kukoc, you had Scottie Pippen. Pippen's presence in the first half, Pippen was an absolute non-factor. Pippen's presence defensively in the second half, in the fourth quarter, was big. He stripped Karl Malone a couple times. He was able to facilitate the offense. He was able to take pressure off of Jordan in terms of bringing up the ball, which would have been more energy that Jordan would have had to expend if Pippen wasn't on the floor. Pippen doesn't play. They don't win this game. And those 8 points he had, you say, well, he only had 8 points. Chicago only scored 87 for the game. Those are big 8 points. Rodman has 7 points. Those are big 7 points. So the Chicago Bulls role players were probably a little bit better than what history has said. A little bit better, to be honest with you. Devastating loss for Utah, to say the least, because to me, and again, I know the previous year, they were closer as far as because it was 2-2 game 5 at their own place, but they have game 7 in their building. Who knows? I mean, you would have leaned towards Jordan. You've been hard pressed to bet against Jordan in a game seven, but Chicago was limping to the finish line. And I mean limping to the finish line. Out of the 6 championship teams, this was the worst out of those 6 championship teams. And rewatching these games, those first 3 championship teams were unbeatable. They really were. 91 through 93, those teams, you were not touching those teams. 96, they had the all-time great season. Okay, they go up 3-0 against Seattle. That series is basically over, even though Seattle makes a push in the last couple of games. 97, 98, the Chicago Bulls team was absolutely beatable. And if you're somebody who roots for Utah, if you're Karl Malone, if you're Jerry Salone, you're John Stockton, there's no way that out of these last 2 years that Utah should not have won at least one of these championships. There's no way. They should have at least one of these championships between 97 and 98. That Chicago team was absolutely beatable. And again, this completely vindicated Scottie Pippen for the migraine game. Like no one could have ever questioned his toughness after a bad back is probably worse than I would say probably worse than a migraine is a bad back. And you knew Pippen knew he had to play in this game. There was no way Pippen was going to sit out this game with that back injury. He knew he had to play it. He knew he had to gut it out. Utah wouldn't. Of course, we know what happened with Chicago. Jackson, Jordan, Pippen were all gone. They went into total rebuild mode, and they have not been the same since. I know they had a couple good years with Derrick Rose and Joakim Noah, but they never reached a championship level since that '98 team. Krause would stay the general manager up until 2003. For Utah, this would be Utah's last championship. Last time they contended. The following year, they would get eliminated by Portland in the conference semifinals, despite the fact that Karl Malone was named MVP in a lockout shortened season. And this was it. I mean, this was it for Utah as far as their window. Their window was closed after this game, and they had a 2-year window where they could have won championships. In 97, 98, they were not able to get it done. And, the difference was, to me, again, we mentioned this before, not having a perimeter player that can get buckets. They did not have enough offense. That's what it came down to. They did not have enough offense to go along with Karl Malone, and it bit them twice. It bit them in the ass in back-to-back years. That's going to wrap it up for this latest edition of the Ril Dil podcast. I will see you next time. I'm out.